So next week, don't forget, 11:15 is when we start, right? Okay? Some of you that just walked in now, don't come any later. It's okay. Walk in at 10 after 11, you'll be fine, okay? A couple things I wanted to share with you real quick. In a few hours here at 4 o'clock, we're going to be doing child and parent dedications. And you may not have a friend or family member that is involved in that, but we would like to invite you, if you have the time free, just to come and support these families that are going to do that. It's going to be right here in the auditorium, and it's going to be a great, great time. And so we want to invite you for that. Also, this is in your program, and unfortunately we still don't have the date, but we will know this afternoon, and so we'll get this out on email and Facebook in different ways. But there's a great movie that's coming out the 28th of this month. And I'm a little reluctant to recommend Christian movies sometimes because most of the time they're cheesy or something else, or very formulaic. This one called Son of God, I've seen parts of it and talked to some people that have seen it. It sounds like just an excellent, excellent movie. And so hope you'll go to see it sometime in a couple weeks. It's going to be out starting February 28th. But just to give you a heads up, we are going to be buying out a complete showing of the NCG Theater, and you'll be able to get tickets then through Dayspring. And what that's for, so that you can come and be a part of that, because we're going to be doing a series that's based on that, and we'll be using clips from the movie, everything else. But it'd be really good if you could go out and see that sometime previous to that. And so a great opportunity too to invite a friend that maybe you're not sure they'd come to church, but maybe they'd go and see this movie about Jesus. And so just watch for that. Next couple days, you'll hear about dates, okay? Hey, the main thing we've been trying to get across to all of us, to me and to you, is that one of the biggest things God wants to do in our life is He wants to grow our faith and He wants to grow our confidence. It's the most important thing to Him. And when people tell their faith stories, they talk about certain things that help them to get to that point. They'll say, you know what, man, I grew in my relationship with God, in my faith, in my confidence. So you talk, and they've gotten to this point where they have this extraordinary confidence in God, knowing that if He's got their back, knowing that He never leaves or forsakes them, kind of thing, knowing that even if they can't see the brushstrokes of His brush on their life canvas at that point, that He is still there, He's still doing it. They just can't see it yet, and that they will in the future. And they've said, I've learned to trust Him. And when they do that, they always mention certain things. Now, we've talked about these things in other weeks, and if you haven't been here, please get on our website or pick up a CD and listen to some of those other messages. But they always talk about this one, and this is one that you don't have a choice in. The others, you can make choices. Oh, do I want to read the Bible? Do I want to pray? Do I want to, get around other people who will, help me grow in my faith? All those kind of things. But this one is it's going to come into your life no matter what. The only choice you get is how you respond to it. Because they will mention some kind of defining moment, some kind of circumstance that happened in their life, and it was one of those things that they say, wow, and maybe you're saying this too. This thing happened in my life, and it helped me to re-engage with God. It helped me to re-engage with church. God became real to me at that time. This can be positive circumstances or negative ones. The positive ones could be like, the birth of a baby. I still remember years and years ago that the birth of my little girl, first one, and being there and being able to experience that. And that miracle, I was just overwhelmed, and I felt like through that, God used that just to, get me closer to Him, to have more faith in Him. Maybe, and by the way, not so much with my older kids. The other two, the boys, forget that. They were miracles, but as they grew into teenagers, I thought, God, really? Okay. It could be you met a person of faith, or that you married or fell in love with at least a person of faith, and that was one of those good circumstances of life that, wow, God really used that in you. Or God answered a prayer, and it may have even been one of those prayers that was just like, I'm in a jam and, pull the fire alarm and hope God answers kind of thing. And maybe you didn't even have much faith, but He did. He came through and you saw that, and that just changed you. Most often, though, it's not the good circumstances. When you hear people tell their faith stories about something God used to grow them, it's not usually the good stuff. It's usually the bad stuff, the bad moments, the bad events, the bad circumstances. And here's why. Times of prosperity, times of peace, times of health, when everything is going well, those don't create a sense of need in us. They don't create a sense of need. In fact, here's the truth. What happens is that kind of life will lure us into thinking that we don't need God. Really. When things are going well and everything, you wouldn't say, I don't need God, but you're thinking it more. But man, when life hits the fan, that's when you really feel the need for God. Faith usually isn't developed in calm waters. It's usually developed in the stormy waters. C.S. Lewis is an author. I'm sure some of you have read his books. He put this in one of his books, and it is probably one of the things that's quoted more over and over than anything else. He said this, it's on the screen. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts to us in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a dead world. It's so many times in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our hurt, that God just speaks with loudest at those times to us. And make no mistake about it. I want to be really encouraging to you right now, okay? If you haven't gone through a tough time recently or right now, things are so great. I want to encourage you. The bad times are coming, okay? They may be just around the corner because it's part of life. And this is what Jesus said to his disciples in John 16:33. In this world, you will have trouble. Not you might, not you could, but you are going to have it. Count on it. It's a part of the human story. It's a part of the human condition. You're going to have problems. Doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not. You are going to have problems. In fact, you're going to have some deep stuff sometimes. And when those times come, you will either lean into God or you'll lean away from God. Maybe you were raised to believe that God would never do this, and then all of a sudden, he does it. Or maybe, that God will always do this, and then he doesn't. Or the mathematical equation. If I just do A, B, and C in my faith, then God will do D, E, and F. If we put them in this box. And then you find you do A, B, and C perfectly, and all of a sudden, D, E, and F doesn't happen. Well, what do you do with God in those moments? Maybe you prayed for something, and it just hasn't come. Usually that's because your time frame's different, because you're like me, you want it now. And I have found so often that God's time frame is way different than mine. So maybe that's all it is. But the bottom line is that God is not acting like you expect him to act. We've got all these things that we think we know how God acts, and you can't put him in a box. So many times he acts like you're not expecting. And you're wanting to make sense of it. You're wanting to somehow connect the dots together. You're so wanting to see some purpose in that thing. And sometimes your faith as a result of that takes a hit. And you say, if God really loved me, God wouldn't do this. God wouldn't allow this, and on and on and on. If you're a parent, or you experience this with your parents, there are times when you're a parent, when you do things or you allow things with your kid, and they say, you don't love me. But precisely, you're doing that precisely because you love them. For example, the first time you take your kid to the dentist, you ever think about that experience? Seat them in this chair. Now it's a little better than when I took my kids. Now it's a little more kid-friendly. But you sit them down in the chair, and you're with them maybe in the room, and then, the doctor starts working on them, or their assistant starts putting off. And your kid's like, what? Where are you going? You're letting this stranger put all the strange things in my mouth, and now you're walking away, and he's going to have his way with me? You don't love me. That hurt what they did. They gave me this shot. I've got more caps than I've got real teeth, folks. I've been in the dentist a lot. And let me tell you, man, that was one thing that I questioned my folks about. When these first two teeth broke and I had to go to the dentist and he put the shots in places where a needle ought not to go, believe me. I didn't understand with my folks what they were trying to do. Oh, God doesn't love me. My job didn't come through. This sickness hasn't been healed. And this and this and this and this. James, who is, he's got a book in the latter part of the New Testament. James was the half-brother of Jesus. Some of you, depending on your faith tradition, may not have realized this. But Mary and Joseph didn't have sex. She was a virgin when Jesus was born. But, after Jesus was born, they had normal sexual relations. And there were other brothers and sisters that were born. And so Jesus had some siblings, a bunch of siblings actually. And most of his family thought he was whacked out. Most of his family thought he was nuts. He's got this Messiah complex, they just couldn't believe it. You read in the New Testament, you'll see that. I'm not making that up. But when the crucifixion happened and when the resurrection happened, that changed at least some of their minds. And James was one of those. His half-brother James, that convinced him. And so he became one of the early followers of Christ, his own half-brother, and he became a leader in the early church. And he's writing to Christians now, and he's writing in the context. He's writing about trials, tribulations, problems, whatever you want to call them. He's talking about the context of that. And he says in verse 3, you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete. The mature and complete part is talking about faith. So let me put up a formula for you here, okay? You go through that trial, you go through that tough thing, whatever it might be. And some of them can become a test of your faith. Am I going to keep my faith in God or am I not? And to those people that hold on and they keep holding on in spite of what the circumstances look like around them, that develops perseverance. And he says it leads eventually to a stronger faith. That faith that says, even though I can't see God at work, even though I don't know what he's doing, and I wish maybe he'd do it a different way, I still trust him, kind of thing. And he has just made, James in that verse, made the connection between lousy circumstances and faith. There's a connection. There's something going on there when your circumstances are lousy. And so here's what I want you to get. If you don't get anything else, get this. God wants to use the hard circumstances of your life to grow your faith. You can't choose whether the hard circumstances are going to come or not. But God wants to use the hard circumstances in your life to grow your faith, to grow your trust, to grow your dependence on him. Now, I'm going to go back to a story that I spoke on actually about 3 months ago. And I was kind of, should I go back there again? But this story so well illustrates what we're talking about. So we're going to go back to John chapter 11, verse 1. And it says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus. So there's this family. They lived really close to Jerusalem, so whenever Jesus was in Jerusalem, there was just a hop, skip, and a jump. I mean, it'd be a little bit of a walk to get to Bethany. And when Jesus and his disciples wanted to get away from the crowds, they would go to Bethany, and they would stay in the home of these people. And they would, eat there or whatever. He became really close friends with them. But now they're not so close because Jesus and his disciples are off along the Jordan River somewhere where John used to baptize, and it would take 2 to 3 days to get to him from where they were at. And so they sent these messengers because the brother was sick. They're 2 or 3 days away, and when they arrive, they say this, Lord, the one you love is sick. They didn't even say his name. They just knew, the disciples knew immediately who he was talking about because this is a closeness. And you're the one you love? Oh yeah, that's Lazarus. He's my friend. In verse 4, when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, that God's Son may be glorified through it. What is that about? God's glory. There's some confusion. All that means is this, is that when he heard this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God. It'll make God look good. That's what God's glory is. Anything that makes God look good, that's him getting glory. This illness, this situation, this trouble, he's saying, what Lazarus was going through and what you are going through, it can be used for God's glory. It can be something that makes God look good. Now, verse 5, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Mary. And basically the writer here, John, is saying, in case you missed it earlier on, these last few verses when I said this, these people were close. He loved them very, very much. Yet, verse 6, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Now get this, because this is what you go through. Jesus here did exactly what you wouldn't expect him to do. He loved them. I think that's why John said, he loved them, and yet he did what you wouldn't expect him to do. He didn't do certainly what Martha was expecting him to do. He stays right where he's at. Just wrong. It seems wrong to us. But after 2 days went by, verse 7, then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back there? They're like, do you not remember what happened the last time we went? They wanted to stone you. By the way, Jesus, your disciples will probably get in a little trouble with you if you go. Why don't you think twice about this? And you can go and read the story yourself. After a little bit, Jesus talked to them, and they were convinced that, they're going to go. It doesn't really matter what we're saying. And so Thomas, who was kind of the Eeyore of the disciples, he was like, you read this, I'm not making it up. Oh, well, let's go with him. We might as well die. We'll all die together kind of thing. You can read it. He said it. Maybe not quite like that, but it's real close. In verse 11, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Think what would go through your mind if you were one of the disciples. What? Wait a minute. You knew this ahead of time? This wasn't something that surprised you? You knew he was sick, and you knew that he was going to die, and you didn't go? Talk about God not making sense. And he goes on, he says, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there. Whoa. They're listening to that. What? You were glad that you weren't there? That he was able to die? For our sake? What's that all about? What about Martha's sake? What about Mary's sake? What about Lazarus' sake? He's dead. But he says, I'm glad I was not there so that, and he said, I'm okay here. I'm going to give you the purpose. I'm going to give you the reason behind this now. Here's what's really going on, so that you may believe. He's saying there's some connection here between what's going on and between your faith and between the faith of Martha and Mary as well. But let us go to him. He didn't just immediately go, or run to their side. I think Jesus was saying, I allowed this so that they could have a bigger faith, so that you disciples could have a bigger faith. Man, that's outside our frame of reference, isn't it? We don't expect God to act like that. So anyway, they go to Bethany. It takes them a little while to get there, of course. And the first one that meets him is one of the sisters, Martha. And she comes to him and says, verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. And it doesn't tell us this, but I just imagine that she wrapped her arms around Jesus and was crying. If you had been here. We all say that at some point in our lives in one way or another, don't we? Why? Why, God? You've got to help me make some sense of this situation. I don't understand. I've got to know that there's some purpose in the pain that I'm going through. If only I could know that something good will eventually come out of this. Jesus, just answer my why questions. At this point, I'm not expecting anything for Lazarus. He's gone, he's dead. But just answer my why questions. If you only answer my why questions, I think I might be able to get through this. We will endure all kinds of pain if we think there's a purpose. If we think there's a greater good in it, just the way we are. And then she says in verse 22, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. It's like, Jesus, I'm not sure about you anymore. For a while I was starting to believe that you were the Messiah, but now I'm not sure. I honestly don't know, Jesus. I do believe you've still got this connection to God, but that's about all I'm sure about. And she's saying, Jesus, I'm heartbroken. I'm angry. I'm not sure what to think about you anymore. I don't understand you. I'm wondering who you are. But I believe that somehow God will give you whatever you ask for. So Jesus said to her, verse 23, your brother will rise again. Now, these are words that Mary had heard before. It's kind of like we would say, well, he's in a better place. You'll see him again one day, this kind of thing, you know. And Martha answered, I know, Jesus, don't need to say anything more. I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. I've heard that before. All the teachers have told me that. Everybody says that. But you could have been here. You could have stopped this. What you're telling me now doesn't do any good. And Jesus said to her then, a game changer, verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. He makes this huge claim. I'm not just what some of these people say, that I'm a good teacher, I do a few miracles. No, I'm the resurrection and the life. And you will meet people like that don't believe in Jesus. They believe in him. They say, I believe he was a good teacher. I believe he loved people. I believe he went around doing good. But Jesus says there's more to it than that. I'm the resurrection. I'm the life. He's making this huge claim. You can't call Jesus just a good teacher because he claimed to be more than that. And so he goes on and says, he who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? He says. And this is more than, do you believe with head knowledge this thing? In the original language here, what it is essentially saying is this: do you put your trust in me? Do you trust me? Not just would you believe this idea, but do you, in the midst of this horrible situation, do you put your trust in me right now? Still believe. Verse 27, yes, Lord, she told him. And I imagine in the midst of her tears and her pain, and she takes a deep breath and says, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who was to come into the world. And even though you let my brother die, even though you didn't do what I expected, even though I don't understand and I have nothing to hang this on, I have no context for this, I trust you. I trust you. Wow. So Jesus next asked to be taken to the grave. And I'm skipping over some verses. You can go home and read the entire story. But he asked to be taken to the grave after he had an identical conversation to that one with her sister. And while he's on his way to the grave, he just stops for a second and looks around and kind of hears the people crying and wailing and sees Martha and Mary in their grief. And it says that Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. And what he's doing is just pausing there for a second to kind of feel what Martha and Mary had been feeling. And he wants you to know that as well. That when you stand at the grave of a friend or a loved one, when you are grieving that kid that didn't turn out and is on a path that, oh, God, please help. You're grieving that mate who betrayed you, that person that really hurt you. Jesus is there with you. And he may not be acting like you want him to act, but he is saying to you, I understand. I understand. I weep with you. I'm not too big, I'm not too almighty to be able to identify with you in this. Verse 39 goes on and he says, take away the stone. Because Lazarus was in this thing, same kind of thing that Jesus had been buried in. They put him in there and then they roll this big stone in front of it. Take away the stone. Now they're all caught off guard. What? Take away the stone? They didn't understand. They were confused. Martha even is like, but Jesus, come on. It's been 4 days he's been in the tomb in this hot Middle Eastern heat. His body is decomposing. You don't want to open the tomb door. You don't want to take that rock away. It's not going to be good. But he tells them anyway, and they remove the stone. And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And there's a whole bunch more to this, but the end of the story is Lazarus came out. He'd been dead for 4 days. Jesus had done this amazing miracle. If there was ever any doubt whether Jesus was the resurrection and the life, that was just taken away right then. And if the disciples are probably looking at this, and you and I are maybe looking at this because we don't understand. We say, Jesus, what? All this drama had to happen? All this stuff had to happen? These people had to go through this, and it was just so they would learn to trust? it had a purpose. Yeah, he allowed that painful situation to show the connection between hard circumstances and our trust, between your hard circumstances and your trust, and how that grows. To let you know that there's a purpose to what you've gone through. There's a purpose to what you're going through right now. He didn't cause it. He didn't cause it. But God takes that stuff, that seemingly random stuff in our life. If you believe in him, he can infuse it with purpose. Now, you hear stories of people who go through situations like this, horrible situations. Some of you have been there. You're even there right now. And yet, somehow, you see them hanging on to faith. And not just hanging on, but you see that somehow their relationship with God grows. They trust him more and more. And when I see people like that, I'm thinking, you guys are rock stars of the faith. Wow. How is that even possible? What makes the difference that when those times come, if you lean into God or you lean away from him? What makes the difference? I remember an event that happened, and I'm not sure how many years ago this happened now, because it's been, I'm going to guess maybe 8, 9 years ago. And maybe I don't remember the date because I've been trying to forget it. Sue and I were sitting at home, and we get this phone call, and the caller ID came up and said something about, emergency services or whatever it was, the 911 thing. Came up, and on the other end was a first responder. And this is Pastor Bill Lanyap. You really need to come over to this house right now because there's been a death, and I think the family would really want you to be here. So right away, soon I got, dressed a little bit and went over to the house, and as we entered the house, we saw Jim Gilbert and Cheryl Gilbert, his wife, and their daughter Rochelle, as they're trying to deal with Rochelle just found her brother having killed himself, shot himself. That's one of those things that I don't get paid enough for, folks, to go into those situations. Even as I tell about it now, man, my eyes well up because we couldn't say anything. There were no words. Don't go into somebody with a situation like that and they're hurting and try to cheer them up with some words, even from the Bible sometimes. Sometimes all they just need to know is that you're there and just hug them. That's all we could do. We couldn't say anything. We were crying ourselves. We just hugged them and walked the next 3 days and weeks with them to see if we could help them get through it. And I just remember that as I watched Cheryl, there is no grief like a mom's grief who has lost a child. Nothing like that. And if you think anybody would walk away from God, you think that would have to be it. Well, about 4 months ago, Cheryl came to us and wanted to record a little bit of their story. And so some of you saw this already, but many of you did not. And so I asked Cheryl if we could show it again. So just listen to her story, and I'll come back and close it up.
I felt that growing up a Christian, I was entitled to extra privileges with God, and boy was I wrong. I didn't start to question God or my relationship with God or his purpose for my life until at age 48 I lost a son that I felt he gave us. We had fertility problems for 4 years, and God gave us twins. So if we have God as the center of our life, why are things going so terribly wrong? We went through fertility problems. We both had come from divorced homes. We had lots of issues with divorced parents, all the regular normal teenage things about kids drinking and drugs and all of those. And I felt at that time, what's my testimony going to be? We made it through all that stuff. So Jim and I are questioning all the whys then. Why fertility problems? Why did one twin have health issues? Why did one son have academic and social issues at school? Why did he have to go through all of that? Why was he allowed to make that final decision? And then why was his twin sister permitted to experience that awful sight of finding her brother? How could this God that we loved How could this God that we trusted, how could this God let all of this happen to our family? Then after losing Ryan, I was angry, extremely angry at God. Jim and I both felt that our relationship with God had changed. It became very difficult. We were beating on God's chest. We were asking why, continually angry. And God used the people of this church. He used the pastors, He used our small group, our greeters at the door. If it wasn't for some of those people greeting us every day, we couldn't have come every day to this church. Now we try and ask what now instead of why. We know that God is going to walk us through a furnace, not around it. And we're going to ask Him to walk with us in that furnace. And we're going to continue to use the people of this church to help surround us with His love. And if you're struggling, God's going to be there for you. And He uses people. And that's what our church is about, using people to surround you with God's love. It's going to hurt and it's going to be hard, but He'll be there to walk through the furnace with you.
Cheryl put it this way, that now they're trying to ask what now rather than what if. And the what now, that's the question they asked, and that's why she did the video, because she felt that's what I need to do, and it was something that helps you, helps me, and also, helps them as well in their healing. But don't you think for one moment that because they said we're going to trust God in this thing and we're going to try to move forward, don't you for one moment think that the pain isn't there? I still think of last night when they were sitting right over here, quietly weeping as they were watching this. And yet they choose daily to say to God, God, I trust you. What makes the difference between people like that who lean into God instead of away from God? Cheryl mentioned it. And part of it is this. It depends on who you surround yourself with. And the sad thing is I see people all the time, they'll go through some life-altering event like this, something really, really bad. And whether it's shame, whether they think people are going to condemn them, people are going to say they don't have enough faith, or whatever it is, at that point, so many people pull away from church, pull away from God, pull away from the very people they need to be around who can support them in the days and the months ahead to be able to deal with that stuff and get through it and eventually begin to try. God's going to do something through this. He's got a purpose. He's got people there to remind us that pain and suffering are part of our story. They're part of our life. That God allows that stuff. He doesn't cause it. But He allows that stuff. And it's stuff that you wouldn't choose. You wouldn't sign up for it. But it's there. What are you going to do? You're going to lean into God, or are you going to lean away from God? There's a book that I would highly, highly recommend that you get sometime. It's an old book. It's not new, but it's been reprinted even just recently. It's by a guy named Philip Yancey. It's called Disappointment with God. And in one place in this book, he writes this. We're going to put it on the screen. Only one thing is worse than disappointment with God, and that's disappointment without God. The disappointments are going to be there, and you may be disappointed with God. But my friend, how much better is it to lean into God at those moments and to have Him to lean on instead of disappointment without God? Because if you've got disappointment without God, you've got no context to be able to process that within. You've got no hope. You don't see any possible purpose in this thing. Please remember that when you feel like things have gone against you and you feel like God is doing something to you, if you will let Him, He's really doing something in you. And like you see through Cheryl, He will even do something through you one day to help other people. God won't waste your pain. Hear me? God won't waste your pain. He won't. And the final chapter of your life is not written yet. Now, all that bad stuff that's happened to you perhaps, and that's happening right now, it doesn't necessarily become beautiful It's not like God's going to take that thing and make it into beautiful. That death of Ryan is a tragedy. I wish I could have gone back somehow and prevented it. It's a tragedy. And the bad stuff doesn't necessarily become beautiful, but God can take the most horrendous, horrific stuff in your life, your darkest hour, and force all of that, force it all to be able to serve his purposes. Romans 8:28 says, the Apostle Paul said, and we just quote this verse sometimes, it says, we know, not we hope, we know that God will take all of that stuff, that God is able to make everything work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And you'll say, is there good out of it? When's that going to come? I don't know. It might not come for years. It might not come until after you're gone. But God has promised that he will, in the midst of the most purposeless situation, the most horrific thing, somehow cause that to submit to his purpose, and he will bring that to serve his. Does God care about you in the midst of this? Think back to the crucifixion. He allowed this greatest crime to take place where Jesus was crucified, the darkest hour of history, to answer the question that you have once and for all. Does God care about me? Well, look at the situation. No. Look back to the cross. That answers the question. Do I care? So, even as Jesus asked Martha, he is here right now asking you and me, do you still believe? Will you still trust me? Will you? There are some of us that for us, it's been years ago. And you're not even sure while you're here. You're not even sure why you came in the door. Maybe it was just because God wanted you to hear this message. But you've got all this pain that you're carrying around, and you're still blaming God, and you're still leaning away from him. It's a miracle that you're here. Perhaps it's because God just brought you here for this very purpose. Today, he is asking you, will you, instead of leaning away from me, will you lean into me? Will you trust me in this? And for some of you, you're going through this right now. The pain is palpable in your life. And you're wondering, will God ever come through? And all these promises I've heard and everything else, God isn't acting the way I wanted him to act, that I thought he would act, that I've always been taught he would act. Jesus is here. Will you trust me? Do you bow your heads with me? I'm just going to end this in a very simple way. Whether you're that person that something happened to you years ago and you're still blaming God, and you're still so stinking angry with him, you can still feel it. And all this, what I've talked about today, has brought all that to the surface, all that stuff you tried to bury. God is asking you once and for all, will you start leaning toward me? Will you trust me today? And for that person that is in the midst of it right now, you don't know what's going on, you don't understand, you are in so much pain, and that I'm not saying the pain isn't there, but Jesus is asking you, will you trust me? It's much better to be disappointed in God than to be disappointed without God. And many of you know, I'm going through this right now. I feel good and everything, but I've got lymphoma. And I prayed by faith. Absolutely, got all kind of faith. Can God heal me? Yes, he can. Do I pray that he will? You better believe it. But when I pray those prayers, I also say, God, if you never heal me, I still trust you. And I feel my faith growing even just in that. So will you dare say, just by raising your hand in just a second, yes, God, I trust you. Just see your hand, just hold it up right now. I trust you. Your hand's going up all over this place. I knew that was going to happen. I knew it. Just keep them there for a second. Let me pray for you. Lord God, you see these honest hands going up. They want to trust you in the midst of this lousy, lousy situation. And so together we say, we trust you. Even though we don't understand, even though we have questions about you, the bottom line is, we're sure you love us. And even now our faith is growing because we believe. We believe that even though we can't see you right now, that you're there, that you're acting, that you're writing on that canvas of our life, and that you're writing the last chapters of our story, not our pain. We trust you. You can put your hands down. Father, I pray that this won't just be a commitment that just happens for this second, but that this commitment will grow, that even in the midst of our pain, like Cheryl and Jim, that we'll still continue to say, what's next? What's next? In Jesus' name, amen. You've made commitments, and there's no reason to pray about that. You know, you've made this commitment. But if you got one of these hard situations right now and you just would like to talk to somebody about it, pray with somebody, the pastors and some of our elders are going to be up here afterwards, and we'd love to spend a few moments with you right at the end of the service, okay?